Hello, everyone, wherever you are tuning in from. Thank you, Adam, Anna, Charles, and Ron for being here today. After a quiet August, we are back with another climate talk. This time we'll be talking about energy management. And before we dig into this topic, we have to apologize to those who have tuned in before, but we have newcomers in our audience and we would like to introduce ourselves. We are an international organization triggered by Taylor Sport. In the last 2 years, we have been building an open and collaborative network, a platform where companies share in a variety of ways climate solutions spread across the wine value chain. By coincidence, someone wrote to us today using the exact words we use to explain our purpose. There should be no competition when it comes to fighting global warming. Climate action is about survival as a species, not as a sector, and we will only be able to respond to this crisis together. In regards to Porto Protocol, we are a growing community with members from different regions, sizes, spread across the wine value chain and in different stages of climate action. This is really important for us. We welcome companies to join us regardless of where they are in terms of climate path. We value progress, action, more than we do perfection. Our experience is showing us that this spirit of inclusiveness creates a wider space for learning and connection between members and to boost climate action. So consider this as an invitation to act and to join us. We would love to meet you and we are a click away. And I just want to tell you about one new project of ours, a carbon management workshop designed with our global steering committee that is an immersion into carbon along the wine cycle. Our global steering committee has Greg Jones, Diana Sace, Dr. Richard Smart, and Nuno Gaspar de Oliveira. I'm sure if you're in the wine industry, you are familiar for sure with some of these names. Check out our website and drop us an email so we can send you all the information. Moving on to the climate talks, they are a fundamental tool in the way we work as they rely on collaborative sharing, having people from different regions, profiles, companies, share their experiences, the best they have done and that they know how. This particular climate talk represents also the beginning of a partnership with the International Vintage Master, whose students will be covering, summarizing, and building a report with additional resources on top of each of our future digital conversations, starting with this one. And for the first time since we started our climate talks more than a year ago, we do not have a wine producer sitting at our digital table, but you'll realize in a minute they are fully represented. So we'll be sharing experiences and ideas on energy management, as we mentioned. And let me introduce you to each of the stakeholders we have here at our table. So our host is Charles Perry. Charles, thank you for being here. Charles is an expert consultant in terms of consultancy and with a long-term experience with energy. And he's been working with various sectors, organizations, and mainly events such as COP26 that is coming in the next few weeks. Then we have Adam. Hi, Adam. Thank you for being here. Actually, both and Charles are tuning in from the UK. Adam is tuning in as a head of energy at Lanchester Wines. Lanchester of Lancaster. I always have this problem, but you'll correct me, Adam, if I'm wrong. Anna is joining. Anna Brittain is the executive director of Napa Green. I'm sure we have a lot of people tuning in from California, mostly the US, but mostly California. So I know you probably know Anna and you know her institution as well. And this is going to be difficult. Runnebaum. He's an assistant professor in viticulture and enology and in chemical engineering and materials science at UC Davis. So without further ado, I will disappear and I'll pass on the word to you. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you so much, Christina. I hope everybody can hear me. Just raise your hands, those I can see, that's good. And Marta as well from the Porto Protocol. Delighted to be invited to chair this wonderful discussion. And indeed, yes, I'm here in Hertfordshire outside of London. I was in London earlier on today, so it's not far away. And I'm based in the UK with my little business, Sustainable Future for All, having exited a couple of other sustainable businesses that I've built over the recent years with different business partners. So we have a great lineup in Anna and Ron and Adam. And knowing that it's nice and early in California, Anna, I'm gonna start with you if you don't mind. And I hope it's a beautiful morning. I hope it's great to join a webinar like this first thing in the morning when you're fresh. So can you just tell us a little bit more about your role at Napa Green to start off with, please, Anna?
Yeah, well, I'm actually calling in from Venice, but don't worry, I purchased my carbon offsets, so I can be here.
You'll have to explain what you're doing in Venice, but that'll come later.
Best vacation. But yeah, so Napa Green is a leading sustainability and climate action certification for both wineries and vineyards in Napa County. So they can be just winery certified, just vineyard certified, or both. And I'm going to be talking more about one of the things that's really unique to our winery side. I think we're going to be talking more about the winery side, which is that we facilitate what are called these integrated resource audits, one-stop energy, water, and waste audits. We've done more than 160 of those. So we have a pretty unique data set and experience to share in terms of evaluating energy efficiency. So I'll talk more about that later. I won't dig in too deeply.
And Anna, if you don't mind, just tell us something about your sort of personal story, how you got to be at Napa Green.
Well, that's good to stress. So my experience isn't just with Napa Green. I have more than a decade of experience in sustainable wine growing consulting. So I've worked much more broadly throughout the state and with Canada. I'm working with Ontario right now on their sustainable wine growing program. And I'm actually from the Napa Valley. I'm a native. I didn't mean to be working there, but this is how it ended up. And it is personally very meaningful to me to have come back after having worked internationally and in Washington, D.C., to now be managing the Napa Green program for 6 years, more than 6 years now, because I am from there, I'm grounded there. It means so much to me to be part of the solution in Napa County and in California.
Thank you very much, Anna. Right, we're going to stick with the American theme, even though Anna's in Venice. I think you are in America, Ron, and it's quite early for you. Tell us a bit about yourself. You're a professor, and where exactly are you today, Ron?
Yes, so I'm on campus at the University of California at Davis. I'm an assistant professor in viticulture and enology, as well as chemical engineering. And so much of my research focuses on more sustainable use of our natural resources, including applications in winemaking and more broadly in agriculture. And
Ron, tell us a bit more about your sort of background. I mean, I know you've got a PhD. Tell us a bit about the journey you went down to get to what you're doing now.
Yeah, so I have an undergraduate and PhD in chemical engineering. Along the way, I found out about winemaking and thought it was a wonderful application of chemical engineering and fermentation, biochemical engineering. And there's just a lot of other interesting chemical engineering questions that I think kind of the discipline can help move forward, especially as they're related to sustainability. So a lot of that is energy management, but also other aspects of natural resources, water, chemistry that we're using, as well as labor, and all of those have implications on the economics of the winery and the industry.
Very good. Right, we're going to turn to Adam, and I understand, Adam, you're in the UK along with myself, so there are two of us UK based and two from the West, from America. Adam, tell us a bit about yourself. Where are you today?
I'm at Lanchester Wines. I'm 300 miles north of you. Up near Durham, and we are a big bottler of wine. Mostly comes from the Southern Hemisphere into the UK. I joined this company in 2012 because the family owners of the business had really bought into the idea that carbon footprint was going to be a sort of differentiator in the market back in 2012, and so they wanted to commit the company to going carbon neutral. We didn't take a very conventional route to that, but we did take account of very much of our place where we are in the UK, up on top of a windy hill. But we'll talk about that, I guess, in the discussions.
We will indeed, Adam. Thanks so much. So just setting the sort of framework in terms of the energy challenge, the energy transition. I mean, so my experience with this goes back to prior to joining BP. So in my 20s, I was an environmental consultant, and I was focused on the oil and gas sector. and Shell was actually my biggest client. And then I did an MBA focused on the business case for sustainability and joined BP, confident that as a change agent, I could go inside a big oil and gas company and try and change it. And that was like going into battle every day, because we formed two big camps, the sort of petrol heads and the greenies. And we certainly didn't see eye to eye, let's put it that way, especially when we launched, I was one of the team that launched in group marketing at that time, the brand, the Helios, the sun, with Beyond Petroleum underneath. And that caused all sorts of anxiety amongst the internal culture in terms of whether BP was getting out of oil and gas, or it was sort of redefining its business, and what did Beyond Petroleum mean, and what was the capital program that was going to support our move into renewable energy. And it turned out that was $8 billion after we did a lot of hard work to get the John Brown and the board to actually unlock that $8 billion. And no sooner that happened, and we started developing our wind and solar assets around the world, many in America. We got to sort of 2006, I left the company, a new chief executive arrived, and that chief executive decided that developing wind and solar farms was a complete waste of time, and started selling off everything that we had been investing in, and went straight back to petroleum. So it just shows you that this journey, this energy transition journey, is fraught with all sorts of difficulty, and it becomes either a vicious circle on the one hand, or it could become, if you unlock it in the right way, a virtuous circle. I think we're still stuck in the sort of vicious, let's call it a vicious cycle, where, for example, if you're an oil and gas company, you're still measured in terms of how much you get out the ground, rather than developing wind and solar assets. They don't give you any rewards for that in terms of your share price. So that was the argument of the chief executive, and he was actually at Stanford, not too far from where you guys are. He made a famous speech in 2007, or where Ron is right now, and he said, we have to return to our primary purpose, which is to create shareholder value, i.e. let's just get stuff out the ground. And then, of course, the oil spill happened a year later in the Gulf of Mexico, and the value of BP halved, and my shares went from 650 to 325, even though I'd left the company. So I was pretty disgusted with all of that. Anyway, going to you, Anna. When you look at the energy challenge, and especially at Napa Green, where you're auditing the sort of whole process, how do you find there's a trajectory? I mean, is it a sort of science-based pathway? Do you talk about net zero? How do you sort of frame it when you're talking, to Napa Green members about navigating the difficulties of the energy challenge?
Yeah, well, one of the things that we do is, and I think is really important for everyone to think about, is we help our members to baseline and track their energy use. Specifically for electricity, it's kilowatt hours per case. That's how we measure it. And what we have, based on having done more than 160 energy audits at wineries, and then also all kinds of energy efficiency research, California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance, et cetera, what we have is sort of benchmarks, goalposts of excellent performance, doing okay, needs improvement. There's opportunities here. So as we help them baseline and we establish that, you're at 10 kilowatt hours per case, and then we make the cost transition there, because that in California translates to about $2.40 per case in terms of electricity investments. We help them look at, okay, so does it look like you have an opportunity here to improve efficiency? And then we help them identify what are the things, from low-hanging fruit to larger level opportunities. One of the biggest opportunities in wineries is refrigeration. So often we're looking at that area. And then something I'm sure we'll talk about more, Adam and I were talking about as we prepared for this too, is making clear too that renewable energy is not energy efficiency, right? So we really talk about do not solarize, as we call it, your inefficiencies. You need to first maximize your energy efficiency, and then that reduces, in the case of solar, that reduces the footprint, that reduces the resources to make that solar, that reduces the cost of that solar installation. It maximizes the benefit of that solar installation if you first maximize your efficiency. So that's very much what we are focused on.
Excellent. And you bring up the point about the visible forms of energy. Solar and wind are renewables, and they're very visible, right. And energy efficiency is invisible largely, right? So there's a sort of pro and con in the terms of, often what's visible is sort of sexier and in terms of pointing to your wind turbines or your solar panels.
Right.
And then there's a lot of behind the scenes going on with the invisible stuff, which is not as easy to PR, if you like, but is very good for direct savings on the bottom line.
Well, yeah, I was going to say that, you know, what is sexy is saving money, because we've helped our members save more than $14 million in electricity costs. So that is something you can point to that's tangible.
So you're actually saying the invisible technologies are sexier than the visible technologies, right? Adam, do you agree with that? What do you think in terms of the visible and invisible opportunities in energy management?
This is a hugely problematic area, and I'm now right in the middle of it, because to some extent I did what Anna is saying is the wrong route. Is that we windized some of our inefficiency, and that's because we are on top of a windy hill. And so with the wind turbines that we installed back in 2012, I was generating 5.5 million kilowatt hours, but I only actually needed 1.5 million to run the factory. And of course, all of the electricity that we didn't need was going back into the grid at trade price. So once you put a commercial overlay on this, actually, for example, I didn't change all the lighting in that 1 million square foot of warehouse to LED all in one go, because actually the electricity that I was using to run the inefficient lighting was incredibly cheap and generated on site 50 meters away. So I did that over 3 years, taking out equipment as it broke down and replacing it as it needed replacing. Because I think there's when you get down to the practicalities of this, there's huge issues of embedded energy in the equipment that you're installing. I have another example of it that we're wrestling with at the moment, which is we clean our wine bottling equipment using steam, which actually gives us rather a high energy input, and on the per case measurement, that's something of a problem. But the problem is that my alternative is a chemical process for cleaning. Uses a lot less energy, but that would require us to put some water processing equipment in. You know, lots of concrete, lots of holes, and lots of potentially more chemicals to reverse the dosing. So if I'm to race to get my per case kilowatt hours low, then we to switch to chemical cleaning in the factory. Then again, I've got millions of kilowatts generated here. I only get trade price for it, and so at the moment we're sticking with steam. But you know, once you get down to the detail of this, it's quite complicated to decide.
It certainly is, and the costs and benefits obviously influenced a lot by government policy, and that can change very rapidly. As we know, in the UK, we've had about 23 energy ministers in about 16 years, in my rough estimation, since I've been in the space. Every energy minister wants to do something different, and most energy ministers, they come into the job not really knowing what a kilowatt hour is, because they don't come from any energy backgrounds. You know, it's not a prerequisite.
Hugely disappointing.
Yeah, you don't have to have worked in energy at all to become the energy minister. So it's and then they have to go on a learning curve, and what they, you know, there's a temptation to latch onto a silver bullet and say, oh, it's got to be that, and then, you know, put all the government incentives into that and pull them away from everything else that the previous government or the opposition minister had done prior to your arrival. So Ron, going to you, and being in California, where we are led to believe that the policy incentives have always, in the last 10 years or longer, have been very progressive in this area of helping small businesses, really sort of become self-sufficient and generate their own energy. I mean, is that a fair conclusion? And how do you view the policy landscape in California?
Well, I guess I would just start by saying that, even in California, it continues to be complicated, because we have not only a state organization, we also have individual counties. The cost of energy from different producers can be different, as well as, trade-offs, as Adam was talking about, with maybe other things that one could do as far as costs of water and waste disposals. And so, it's not really possible to have, say, one solution that fits all. It's helping everyone understand, how to measure some of these things and do so over time, so they can decide what's best for them and their business and their location.
And Ron, in the whole wine farming process, if we just get into the detail of the sort of whole value chain, I mean, where have you spent a lot of your time focusing? I mean, is it across the board, or do you find that there are really quick wins in certain specific areas that you've actually made your specialization?
Well, I as a research faculty, I kind of specialize across the board right now. A good amount of it is in sort of energy management, but these things become very intertwined. So, for instance, we have these tanks behind me. These are highly polished tanks. Again, that would be a significant capital investment for any winery, but them being highly polished, it minimizes the adherence, any sort of particulate matter adhering to the sides of those walls, which then reduces the chemistry and hot water that one needs to clean them. And so these things end up becoming quite intertwined. And so sometimes these decisions end up sort of cascading from one another.
And that's on the sort of production side, and the sort of the winemaking side. What about in terms of actual the agricultural? So, for example, tractors. I mean, are you still finding that all the tractors are diesel, or are you seeing moves to electric and hydrogen? I suppose it's still very expensive to have, alternative fueled tractors. Are you seeing much of that in California?
I think there's some companies that are kind of going down that path, but I think there's still a lot of challenges from that standpoint. My research and focus is more on the winemaking side and less so on the growing side, and so I'm not as familiar with where things are at this time and the capacity of those types of tractors.
Right. We'll come back to the winemaking side. I want to go to Anna. Yeah, Anna, please come in.
Well, yeah, I can speak to that tractor piece. There's, I hate to just call out one, but there's Monarch Tractor. There's another regional group that are really taking off right now in terms of electric tractors and are actually showing themselves to be quite cost effective because, of course, there's regional specific incentives, right? But we have regional incentives that kind of offset that purchase of electric tractors. So we're actually seeing a huge interest right now in the purchase of electric tractors, just kind of as a side note. But one of the other things I wanted to know that relates to what Adam and Ron were saying is this isn't just thinking about your electricity use, your natural gas use, your propane, your diesel for the unfortunately increasing number of generators we're having to have in Napa County due to the fires. But it's again, thinking with much more complexity in terms of your overall production. So I was talking to a journalist recently who was really confused when I said this. And I said, anything that a winery does to save water or reduce waste is also reducing energy use and carbon footprint. She's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? But transporting, treating, and heating water is a huge energy use. So we talk about this steam cleaning issue a lot, just to what you were talking about, Adam. It's saving water. It might be increasing energy use. So there's this complexity, this trade-off there. And the same thing with your waste going to landfill, emissions, the actual, trucking of that waste and the energy that takes. We've had one of our wineries that focused on really reducing their waste, and they reduced their costs by more than $30,000 in terms of trucking of that material, right? So there's just the whole complex array of how we have to think about energy. It's not just the literally turning on the lights, turning on the refrigeration.
Yes, and like you say, it is different for different sectors. Like I'm in the northeast of England. It rains quite a lot here, and the reservoir is 40 kilometers away. Water is not that critical really as a resource here. It's cheap and plentiful. It falls out of the sky all the time.
Not true here.
But if we get American winemakers over here, they're horrified how profligate we are with the water.
Adam, tell us a bit about space heating, because I know you focused a lot on that.
Yes, that's I suppose where we've taken a big step forward in the last 2 or 3 years. Once we'd addressed the big issue of electricity use. We were very fortunate with our location. We effectively turned a competitive disadvantage of our location into a competitive advantage by putting these 3 half a megawatt wind turbines on the site. moving down the list, our next biggest energy use was space heating, because we do a lot of warehousing of wine and warehousing and distribution. And again, looking at our location, we're in an old mining region. And so all these Victorian, 1850s mines under our site are all flooded, and quite big voids, quite big spaces for water. So we rather boldly stepped into developing a mine water heat pump, which I think is a real advantage when you're pioneering these kind of things. If you don't know how complicated the thing is before you start, we never would have done this if I'd known how complicated it was. But actually, it's finally been a success. It's initially a 9-month project. I'm saying it's a success on year 4.
Very good. I mean, I know we had an image of it, but I probably think it's probably a bit complicated to show that image now.
But basically, what we're doing is we're sucking up mine water from the flooded mines, which is at about 17 degrees, and we're putting it through a heat pump process, which is very established technology in refrigeration. It's the same technology, it's the same companies that provide it.
There we go.
Oh, I've got a logo right in the middle. Let's lose the logo right in the middle. Yep. So that's a big warehouse. There we go. So that's a 240,000 square foot warehouse, and at one end of the site we've got these boreholes sucking up this water at about 17 degrees. It's going through a fairly simple heat pump process, and we're putting the water back at about 10 or 12 degrees. We do this with our big flow of water. We're trying to get up to 100 litres a second flowing through this thing, because then we're looking at a heat pump that's possibly getting up to 6 to 1, 6 kilowatts of heat in the warehouse to 1 kilowatt of electricity to run it. Now that's pretty good for a heat pump. You're normally starting to think that they're economic at about 3 to 1. So lots of refining to go on. The water isn't terribly clean down there. And it's got various chemicals in that eat all my sensors. That was the first year's problem. The chlorides in the mine water ate all my flow sensors and depth sensors. So some challenges, but I think overall this is quite a good leap forward in terms of space heating, in terms of adding another technology. Obviously it's location specific, but this whole region is littered with these flooded coal mines. So actually for the northeast of England, this is not just a wine industry opportunity. This is any big warehouse spaces. The other photos around this are just some of the plant and machinery, all fairly recognizable stuff. A refrigeration plant looks exactly like that top photo there. So there's a heat exchanger. You can see some fairly big pipes there. So 100 litres a second is quite a lot, but that's what gets the efficiency up. So I engaged consultants from Iceland to help me with the initial design. Even they got out of their depth, and so we've actually we've engaged lots of people from the university. We're getting there now. This is good technology, and the exciting news is that a kilometre down the road is the region's big art centre, and they've just started to do exactly the same thing, and they're developing a 6 megawatt mine water heat system just a kilometre away, based on ours. Because as Marta talks about, we've shared absolutely everything with the local authority on this journey, because the objective is to share this and make it more universal.
Very good, Adam. There's definitely some learnings there, both on the wind front and the space heating front, in terms of what not to do as well as what to do from your experience. I'm going to go to Ron. I mean, in terms of what you've learned, Ron, in terms of where to start and where the low-hanging fruit are, can you enlighten us in where would you, if you were new to this, for example, right, as a wine farmer, what are some of the tips you would give in terms of the first steps you would take to help manage your energy?
Yeah, I think identifying places where you can become more energy efficient, and kind of that, of course, can reduce the overall energy use. I think a place, especially if you're a winemaker and you're reporting to others in an organization that are looking at costs and so forth, looking at when you're using the energy is also very important. So, especially in California, most of the energy providers have time of use pricing. And so if you can better understand what energy you need to use, and even if you can't be much more efficient, if you can start shifting that usage away by maybe pre-cooling something, or at a different time of day, or doing an operation at a different time of day, you can at least start to show some value in thinking about energy to the company.
Yeah, that's very helpful. So you bring up the arbitrage, is the word we use a lot, opportunity there in terms of how much you generate yourself in terms of both electricity and heat and cooling, but also in terms of what you could feed back onto the grid. And some countries, aren't as advanced. Like in South Africa, we were having a discussion with Bruce Jack Wines and Distel the other day, and they don't have the same framework in terms of feed-in tariffs, so they don't get a payment for that. But that arbitrage opportunity in markets like California and in the UK, when the policy framework is understood and not disrupted, is a huge benefit, isn't it?
Yeah, and I would say one other thing is to also think about the length of time that you're using the energy. So for instance, if you need to cool something down, if you decide to cool that down over 3 hours instead of 1 hour, you can reduce the energy usage at any one point in time. And so that's been an advantage to us in some of our rainwater capture systems, and the energy that we would need to use to purify that into potable water. We have a very small reverse osmosis unit, because much for us in California, much of that rainwater typically falls sort of in the off season for winemaking operations, and so we can kind of spread that sort of process out over weeks and months, and so that allows us to utilize solar power that we have on site to run those operations. If we were trying to clean that water as it was being collected, we would have to have a much larger energy requirements.
Very good. Anna, now you talk about green champions, don't you, Napa Green?
Yes.
Is that right? Is that the language that you celebrate case studies of, folks that are really trying hard on this? Can you just give us an example of a sort of green champion that's done something interesting? And I note that Martin and Christina are putting some case studies, I think, through in the chat as well. So yeah, something that comes to mind that's an interesting story on a green champion.
Yeah, and in preparing for this, what she's sharing is I wrote up an article of kind of our key findings and successes in improving energy efficiency. So to make me feel useful, please go read that article. But I will say, so I'll think of a champion as I'm saying this, but one of the things that we do is that we require that all of our wineries have what's called a green team, or they can call it whatever they want to call it. We call it a green team. But and most of our members are very small. I want to stress that. So that might just be 2 or 3 people, but dedicated people that are tracking energy use, seeing where there's opportunities. And I have to say, where we've seen the most opportunities. So one of the wineries that comes to mind, although this was on water savings, but as I said, water savings have an energy savings, is St. Supri Estate. We did an audit with them. They saw an opportunity to save more water. They then said, okay, this is our goal. And then they called tailgates with their team. They said, this is our goal. This is where we're at. This is where we want to be at. What are your ideas for what we could do better? And then they took those ideas and they implemented them. And then critically, they gave them regular feedback on the progress they were making. This is what we achieved. These are the savings we have. This is how much more we want to do. And everybody got kind of a little competitive, friendly competition. Like, I want to know what hospitality is using, and I want to know what the cellar's using. And they were able to cut their water use, which again had an energy savings by more than 20% in 2 years. So those kinds of things, that feedback, that engaging the team and letting them really kind of track where they're at, again, getting back to that tracking the use and feeding that back is really, really important.
Very good. And I think you use the phrase thinking systemically or systematically, right? As a system. So everything that is interplaying. And I think that's a very clever approach, which reminds me of the sort of point I was making about turning it into a virtuous circle as opposed to a vicious one.
Yeah.
Adam, going to you. I mean, do you guys have a green team, or is it all left to yourself? I know you're the expert on energy in the business, but
I must admit, I have found it quite hard. We've got about 500 people across the business, and I haven't been as successful as I ought to have been in bringing people across. Bringing people into this and getting them excited about it. Do you know what? I was walking across the car park to come to this meeting, and I was infuriated by how many people were waiting to be picked up in cars that were running. Things like that annoy me so much. And you know, I haven't, you know, any staff that are on board or that are being waiting in the car park with the engines running haven't got it somehow.
It's a tough one that I've come across that many times. Ron, any lessons in terms of how you share the workload? Do you get much support?
We have a couple of faculty members and staff members that are helping on this, but definitely I would say in the last few years, you know, we could probably increase that to try to keep up with the pace of the changes in need. I mean, you know, as far as over the last 5+ years, you know, I think the wineries in California are thinking a lot more about, you know, energy usage, water usage with the droughts, you know, even sort of the time of use and having on-site generation and storage to kind of manage through some of the power outages. And so, you know, there's things that are changing a lot more, and you know, sometimes, especially at large organizations like the university, we're not always able to keep up with that as much as we would like to.
Ron, while we're with you, tell us a bit more about the LEED certification and with platinum and the whole sort of implications on efficiency.
Yeah, so, you know, we were able to sort of start out with kind of a vision that really was started probably about 2 decades ago with some of my colleagues in discussions with Robert Mondavi, you know, and kind of their investment in our department, including this teaching and research winery. And so, you know, this allowed us to start with the infrastructure that help us reduce energy usage. And so we have things like a high level of insulation in this building, a lot of natural lighting. I'll see if I can move out of the way here, and you can see we have lights here. There's only one of them on, you know, for the people that are working here. And the lights that are typically on in this building are required by the fire department. And so this kind of gives us the infrastructure, you know, to use less energy. But we wanted to go beyond that and trying to achieve and demonstrate ways to become, you know, sort of zero water or net water, zero on site, as well as energy production. And so that really required us to have a complementary building for that sort of infrastructure, which is the Jessex Jackson building for sustainable winemaking, where now we have a larger solar panel array. We have energy storage with used batteries that allows us to now, you know, essentially run the winery off the grid, as well as, you know, reduce peak usage and kind of demonstrate that. Wow. And future work for us is going to be more on water, you know, clean in place so that we can recycle the chemistry that we're using. And so that becomes a choice in what sort of chemistries we're using and demonstrating that might be, that will work for the industry.
Clearly a lot of best in class technological innovation there, Ron. Now I want to turn to the issue of access to finance, because again, when we were talking to the Southern African businesses about their challenges, one of them was to do with, you know, accessing finance to then invest in solar or wind or any other technological improvements from an energy point of view, for example. And it's again a cycle that one wants to create, where governments support the financiers in a way that the financiers can then support the SMEs, especially if they're trying to innovate, right? Anna, any thoughts about how that cycle can be improved from an access to finance front?
What's an interesting one in terms of, I would say almost half of our certified wineries, we have 85, 86 certified wineries, do have their own renewable energy. But that finance is a challenge. I don't know if this is a phrase that goes beyond the United States, but a lot of them have what's called a power purchase agreement. So they're not the direct owners of the solar. They're kind of an intermediary creating the solar, and that can be a more effective upfront financial solution. But then of course it's kind of like leasing a car. They get less of the benefits later on once that solar has paid itself off in terms of the installation. Another challenge, not to be a Debbie Downer, but that we have in California is, Adam, you were talking about you only get the trade price for that energy you feed back. We don't even get that. Depending who your energy provider is, I won't go too far down the rabbit hole, but we do have some what are called community choice aggregation groups that are providing higher levels.
Yeah, we have those. Yeah.
In California. They will pay for that excess energy fed back to the grid, but it's not the value of that per kilowatt hour based on what people would pay. So there's still that challenge of, like, I have solar, I don't get paid for that excess, it's about 24 cents per kilowatt hour in California. You'll usually only get a fraction of that paid to you for any excess. So that's a big challenge right now, I think, in terms of that financial piece.
It certainly is, and I see there's some very interesting and helpful points being put in the chat. And for example, Kelly's even got her email address there on some of the learnings and opportunities with regards to financing. I mean, Adam, what do you feel about whether there are financing opportunities for SMEs to? For example,
I think in the UK this is getting better, actually. Certainly, people in the banks are understanding this. I mean, getting the finance on the first wind turbine in 2012 was painful, and we basically had to asset back it with a building, because that was the only thing they understood. It was the first wind turbine the bank had financed. But now they're turning up with these huge funds that they have to invest in sustainability projects. So if your business is in reasonable shape, I would say that finance, my experience of finance is it's getting a lot better.
So initially, my guess is you would have had to go to a specialist lender like Triodos Bank, but now it's more mainstream. Is that what you're saying?
Absolutely. HSBC now are turning up with these vast funds that are, looking for sustainability projects here in the UK.
And that's fortunate for the UK. I mean, again, I think in developing countries, that's very difficult to find. And it does beg the question, everyone's just been in New York talking about climate finance. The Americans have just doubled their commitment towards the $100 billion that we agreed in Paris, but it hasn't materialized. I mean, do you think that sort of money, right? Let's say it is 100 billion, which is still a small amount. I mean, do you think that kind of climate finance funds from the developed world should be channeled into helping developing world businesses do things like transition away from coal in South Africa or India or China?
Well, obviously, if we're going to make a difference at the global level, and I must admit, this area is what causes me most stress, actually, when talking and thinking about these sort of projects. If you start thinking about the big picture and what we have to do as a planet, it can get quite depressing, really. I must admit, I don't know much about how government finances like 100 billion that's been proposed. I don't know much about how that works in terms of spreading it around the world, but clearly we could be better at it. But my experience of a sort of small commercial world is we are getting better at it. I don't know how that's going to translate into funding these things around the world in the way that we need to do.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, I think if we're going to get serious, we need to get into the trillions. I mean, if you think about 2% of the global GDP is roughly $2 trillion, and that seems like a much more reasonable approach if climate change.
But much of this should get easier as these things become economically viable. I mean, now solar panels are one of the cheapest forms of electricity generation. Surely that changes the balance in these things and the way funders look at it.
Yeah. So let's just get into some of the other technological areas that people are asking about in the chat, like battery storage, which I think is is a really good one. And I've had a bit of experience with the hybridization of solar and batteries. In the UK, we founded a company called GridServe Sustainable Energy, 4 of us. And initially it was about balancing the grid. With all the renewables going onto the grid, there's been a balancing problem, but actually we've sort of morphed that business model much more into sort of supercharging of electric vehicles, because otherwise you're too reliant on the national grid and their sort of tender opportunities. I mean, Ron, let's go back to you on storage. You've experimented with so many different technologies. What's your view on the sort of battery opportunity with the renewables? Do you see a lot of that coming into play now?
Yeah, I think we are seeing a few wineries that have adopted that, over the last number of years. And I know there was a question about larger installations. I guess it maybe depends on how large they are, but I know that there are some fairly large companies that have invested in that for some of their sites. Obviously much larger than us on campus, but we do about 100 tons of processing on campus. And again, you can see we have a lot of small fermenters here. So many times when you go to smaller scale for the smaller wineries out there, the scaling of cost per gallon of wine is kind of to your disadvantage, just, for instance, from a volume to surface area standpoint. And so that sometimes puts us at a disadvantage. And so our small system here is working sufficiently for us at this time, but we have seen at least a couple of producers, invest in that kind of in the North Coast area, at least.
Yeah, because it certainly enables your earlier points on arbitrage with the behind the meter sort of security of your own supply, and then being able to feed it back to the grid when the price is right to actually have a little bit of a commercial opportunity there to actually make a bit of money, because you're storing your own energy and using it wisely, and feeding it back when the price is right. So Anna, I mean, what's your thoughts on the sort of hybridization of these different technologies?
Well, in terms of batteries, as Ron said, we have had a few of our members that have installed batteries. I think the important thing, the thing we find some folks still don't understand, is that batteries aren't going to run your winery if the electricity goes out, right? We've been having the power turned off by our electricity provider due to these fire risks. Batteries aren't going to run the winery. They're just there to shave that peak energy use. That's where that utility is there. And I think the engineer that leads our audits has felt like that hasn't been cost effective for most wineries. So that gets back to this financing and funding issue, but it's getting more and more cost effective. So I think we see huge potential there in terms of batteries as that gets more cost effective moving forward. And
yeah, sorry, just to go to Adam for a second, we'll come back to you, Anna, because you were talking about a surplus of wind energy that you were generating that you didn't need, right? So surely, I guess you didn't have batteries at that time when you were doing wind.
No, we have batteries on the agenda now. We have a company that's designed us a system, and where it will go into we're building a new facility at the moment, and that will have a megawatt of solar on the roof, because we haven't invested much in solar yet, and it will have a battery system that actually will run the factory for 4 hours. So that's partly a security thing, that's partly an excess electricity thing, and smoothing the peaks. But yes, I would say it's I'm wrestling with it a little bit, because I mean there's a lot of embedded energy, there's a lot of chemistry in there, that a lot of material. So I'm not absolutely convinced that it's the right way to go for us just at the moment. In the big picture, we've got quite a lot of other things to go at. We're a commercial organization, so really we can't, we're limited by our finances. So
but am I right, Adam, in understanding that you weren't able to monetize the surplus of wind energy in the past? Because you were generating more wind than you needed to consume.
Well, we get a trade price for it. We're a 24-hour a day operation, six days a week, with a clean down on Sundays. So it's a constant electricity. Yeah.
Because what was the sort of saga about in Scotland? There was apparently, maybe it was just the Daily Mail causing trouble, as some of these newspapers do. That there was so much excess of renewables that it was just all being wasted? I mean,
yes, I think that has been Daily Mailized. I think you know, with energy management, there's always the peaks and troughs, and actually, what I think is if we've got enough batteries to be off grid, we've probably got too many batteries, because a certain amount of that capacity will probably only get used 2 or 3 times a year, and I think that's really wasteful as a resource, unless we can connect it to the grid and do what you were suggesting there, do a grid feedback. The problem is in our region that you have to be 3 megawatts to be able to manage your own grid supplementing. So there's a scale issue, and I don't think that we want to be at that scale, because I think we would end up with too many batteries on site. It would be a
that's very
waste of
interesting.
resources.
Okay, so just going back to Anna, I mean, anything else you wanted to say, Anna, on other hybrid opportunities besides, you know, the battery one we've been discussing?
Well, this is one of those examples where I'm not going to directly answer the question you've asked me. But I think what we've gotten to is kind of this really high level conversation. And a lot of these are things that right now only really big players can afford, right? Like Jackson family. And so at least for us, most of our members are much smaller. And so we're talking about things that a lot of our members couldn't really take advantage of. But what I do wanted to mention, again, to that systems thinking approach, and I know this has been covered in other Porter Protocol conversations, but is also thinking about energy management in terms of your purchasing, right? So I know this is a big topic of conversation, but we know that packaging and distribution is anywhere from 30 to 50% on average of any winery's carbon footprint. And a lot of that is the energy and producing and manufacturing and moving, shipping that to you and then shipping it out to customers. So I just I'm thinking more about kind of getting back to those, what can the smaller to medium sized wineries do? That's a really key area to think about in terms of your larger system, is that environmentally, it's not a sexy term, but environmentally preferable purchasing, lightening bottle weight, thinking about your packaging choices, all of that's very key to energy management.
Very good. And I mean, you've provided a takeaway in terms of some of those sort of steps, haven't you? I think it's in the chat as well, right? In terms of the slide that I think I saw you send. Let's just see. Yes, that one. Thank you very much. Again, Martin, very quick. So don't solarize you. Yeah, this is some of the stuff that you were just sort of referring to, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think we've all sent a slide of kind of some high level recommendations. So this will be available to everybody who's listening today. But just trying to give some key recommendations of what we're working on. This doesn't get specifically to that packaging and distribution, but we have a lot of resources too on our website. If you go to member resources, we have some things about packaging, but that's another important area to think about, definitely.
Yeah, that's very helpful. And Ron, in terms of your sort of takeaway, I mean, what are some of the? Oh, here we go. Brilliant, Martin, you're too good. I think it's you. Do you want to talk to this a little bit, Ron?
Yeah, so I think I've covered a number of these things, and it sounds like, especially through organizations like Napa Green, you know, measuring and monitoring, you know, not, you know, energy usage and other types of resources like water, and especially being able to quantify how much and when. So then you can start thinking about prioritizing, you know, what you're doing as far as minimizing that usage or changing when you're using it. So again, for someone that maybe isn't at a point where they can change out any sort of infrastructure, if you can start thinking about, when am I using certain resources, and can I shift that to different parts of the day? And of course, if you're monitoring and measuring that, then you can also identify ways that maybe you can reduce that, and kind of really like that example that Anna had about sort of the competition within the various aspects of the facility, which is fantastic. And we're continuing to work on and demonstrate ways of both using data archiving for real-time monitoring and analysis, as well as doing this over longer periods of time. So, you know, we can start to look at trends as far as when people are using different resources, maybe sometimes in a good way, as well as where we could really try to dig down and understand why was it that we were using that resource to a much greater extent at that time.
Yes, indeed. And it's very, I mean, how do we keep abreast of the learnings from UC Davis in terms of the scalability as you do that, Ron? Is that something that hopefully the Porto Protocol is going to help with that, because there's clearly a lot of stuff going forward that it'll be good to stay abreast of from you.
Yeah, we do a pretty good job, I guess, of trying to communicate, within California. But I'm hoping that maybe interactions with the Porto Protocol can help reach a broader audience.
Very definitely. Now,
so.
yes. Sorry, was that Christina coming in, or Marta?
It was Marta, yes, saying just yes, we are hoping for that as well from UC Davis.
Very good. And it's a good time to hand back to you, Porto Protocol, but I probably have missed some questions in the chat because we've had such a sort of fast-moving conversation. And I apologize to people in the chat if I haven't put your questions to the panel. And Christina, you might have seen some that I've missed out, but I think it's probably time that I hand it back to you to try and wrap up. But I've certainly enjoyed having our discussion with Ron and Adam.
I'm just going to ask one more question to Ron. So we look at the future before going on to the present. Ron, can you share with us what can we expect in the future in terms of new technologies that you're looking into, and that we might be able to scale worldwide in terms of energy management? Or as Anna said, when we save water, we are saving energy as well. Can you just give us a glimpse of what we might be looking into and we have to stay tuned for?
Yeah, so one of the things is clean in place. We're kind of going through some bids right now for that sort of system, where we would be doing a much better job of recycling not just the water on site, but also the chemistry. These types of technologies have been used for decades in other industries like the dairy. But what we find in many instances, even trying to reapply something from brewing is not trivial because of the seasonality of winemaking. And so we're looking forward to moving forward with that, hopefully in the upcoming years.
So thank you for that, Ron. If summing it up, wrapping this conversation, looking at this table, we have from maximizing energy efficiency, starting with Anna, looking at small producers that might not have the investment capacity to go into wind and geothermal, as Adam has showed us here. We have looked at new technologies and looking at state-of-the-art wineries with LEED Platinum winery, as UC Davis has, and we've seen top-notch renewable energies with Lanchester. But we should never forget, and I think honestly, that's two really important messages. And using Anna's words, maximize your energy efficiency. And this is so basic sometimes, and it doesn't require and I think that's our key message. It doesn't require much to start climate action. You don't have to go into solar tomorrow, into wind. And this is really important. And another thing is, and I think, honestly, that's one of the reasons why we decided not to entitle this climate talk as energy transition or anything of a kind. We wanted to go back to basics. That's really important. First of all, that we start with simple things, because they can make a really big difference, even in terms of carbon footprints and how we are impacting the environment. And another thing is, never forget that when we're talking about energy in terms of wine production, we're not just talking about your lighting and your tanks. We are talking about your packaging and your transportation and your car fleet, your lighting at the offices, everything is energy management. So never forget this and take a look at the wine value chain. So we'll leave you for now. Again, we have to thank one of our members. I think he was listening, which is Tom from Dot on It Vineyards. He was the one that suggested that we have some sort of deliverable from our guests. And that's why we showed you this slide with the key takeaway messages from each of our guests. So thank you, Tom. We want to make these talks as efficient, as practical as we can. We have two other talks coming up. One of them is a new topic, not new, but we haven't seen it so much. And again, it's a very practical one from where we stand, which is circular innovation in the wine industry. It's very practical because that's the way we'll be approaching it. We will be bringing you real practices of how this is coming to life in various companies within the wine world worldwide. And then we'll have another business sense of internalizing climate change. Some of you have listened before. It's a fourth and last edition of the year. And we have, again, 3 amazing guests. We have Caroline Thompson-Hill from Accolade Wines. You probably know this company. She's the MD for the UK branch. And they're doing amazing things, again, also actually in regards to circularity and packaging, lightening their bottles and trying new formats such as Garson Wines, which is another member of ours that has a PET recycled bottle. We have Nicole Sierra-Rollet, which is from Chêne in the US, in France, although she's American as well, and Michele Manelli, which is from Salcetto in Italy. So I'll leave you for now. Don't forget to send us an email if you're interested in our carbon management workshop. And I'll say goodbye. This will end up abruptly, and I'll contact our guests in a few seconds. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.